The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're very pleased to have the Senate Majority Leader with us this morning, Senator Tommy Norment. Welcome, sir.
Woody, it's a delight to be back with you, sir.
Well, congratulations on your re-election as the Senate Majority Leader, and you are also co-chair of the Finance Committee. Now, you have additional duties and responsibilities as a result of that?
Well, there's some vicious rumors going around about those two positions. Some of my friends make a very subtle distinction between congratulations and condolences on that dual role. It's put a little more, energy into me to make certain that I balance the roles appropriately. Fortunately, I'm blessed with a very good staff, working with Senator Hanger, who is the co-chairman of the Finance Committee. We've been able to distribute some of the workload between the two of us. So it's working out very well so far.
And as Majority Leader, what are you responsible for?
Oh, I just pretend that I'm the Majority Leader. I try to provide some direction and control, some may say discipline, on the legislative process on the floor of the Senate. That's just designed to make sure that things run efficiently. As you and I were talking earlier, we're here for 60 days. We'll be dealing with over 3,000 pieces of legislation during that period of time. There's a lot of emphasis on moving efficiently, but also moving fairly. So in that role as the Majority Leader of the Senate, I try to keep the train running on time and make sure that we're getting the business of the people done in a fair but expedient way.
And what role does the President of the Senate have in relation to you as Majority Leader?
Well, the Lieutenant Governor is a constitutionally elected office, and the sole role of the Lieutenant Governor is to preside over the Senate, just as the Vice President of the United States presides over the United States Senate. So the Lieutenant Governor presides over the Senate. If inquiries are made about the application of rules, the Lieutenant Governor makes a ruling on that. Of course, he's always subject to being overruled by the Senate if they disagree with his interpretation of it. I would say primarily it's a ceremonial position. What is not ceremonial is that the Lieutenant Governor can cast a tie-breaking vote when there is a 20-20 vote in the Senate. There are a couple of exceptions. The Lieutenant Governor cannot vote on judges. That would require 21 members of the Senate. Also of extreme importance is the Lieutenant Governor cannot break a tie vote on the budget or constitutional amendment.
Now, how do you balance your role as the Senate Majority Leader, looking out for the entire Commonwealth, so to speak, in relation to your particular district?
Well, I've always thought of Virginia appropriately as a Commonwealth, and if you break that word down into common and wealth, I think it's very reflective of my attitude about governance. Most of the issues that we deal with in the General Assembly during a session are not just applicable to the community where I live. The law is equally applicable and equally enforceable from Big Stone Gap to Chincoteague. So I try to keep that in mind. Of course, there are parochial issues that come up no matter where you live or what area you represent. When I have a parochial issue, I try to persuade members of the Senate that it is a good public policy. For instance, tourism is a huge issue in the area I represent of the Historic Triangle. Many times when I raise tourism issues, people think that that's just a parochial issue. However, you take the opportunity to remind the entire Senate that tourism is about 11 to a $12 billion industry, and it's not all generated in the historic triangle. There are many tourism sites throughout Virginia that cover every jurisdiction. So there are very few pieces of legislation that just focus exclusively on an area that we independently represent.
Now, there was a signature event last Saturday, I believe. There was a ceremonial session in Williamsburg, Virginia. That happens, what, every 4 years, I believe?
Woody, does happen every 4 years. In 1619, which we will have a 400th commemoration coming up in 2019, but in 1619, one of the definitive events in not just Virginia history, but American history, was the convening of the first legislative assembly in this hemisphere down at Jamestown in the old Jamestown Church. And that happened, I think, in July of 1619. In 1699, the capital of Virginia moved from Jamestown to what was then known as Middle Plantation, which is now known as Williamsburg. So every 4 years, Colonial Williamsburg Foundation invites the members of the General Assembly and the executive branch to come to Williamsburg for a commemorative session. That commemorative session is held in the colonial capitol at the very end of the Duke of Gloucester Street. The senators and members of the House who attend gather in the chambers. We always have a speaker who will address the joint assembly at that point. This year we had President Taylor Reevely, who is the president of the College of William and Mary, a marvelous speaker with an incredible sense of dry humor interlaced with history. So we had really a wonderful time. Colonial Williamsburg Foundation was a terrific host. I think all of us that were in attendance were very appreciative of the hospitality that Colonial Williamsburg Foundation extended, but we were also reminded of the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia, which literally permeated throughout this entire nation.
I understand that there was an interesting debate played out by a couple of actors regarding the adoption of the Constitution of the United States.
Actually, there were. Colonial Williamsburg Foundation has some terrific interpretive actors, if you will, out of the colonial history. There's a Thomas Jefferson, who's the most extraordinary representative of Thomas Jefferson's interpretation. We also have, Patrick Henry, who was there, George Mason on occasions, Lafayette, Marquis de Lafayette. And so there was a debate, and it really was quite entertaining.
Now, a couple of matters that you are carrying this year relate to the budget. And that's always the signature bill that has to be resolved. And of course, the Commonwealth is required by the Constitution, the state Constitution, to balance the budget. Tell us about that process and what's going on in terms of the budget.
In the even years that the General Assembly convenes in Richmond, one of the primary responsibilities of the legislature is to enact a 2-year budget, and we refer to that as a biennium budget. In December of each year, the governor of Virginia is required to present the executive budget that he and his administration designed to the money committees. So in December, the governor appears before the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Finance Committee and presents his version of the budget. That budget is then delegated to the House of Delegates and to the Senate of Virginia, where independently of the two bodies, we begin to work on our respective versions of the budget. So we take the governor's budget, and the legislative branch amends his budget to reflect what the priorities of the legislature are. So right now we are in the process. The House Appropriations Committee, under the direction of Chris Jones, is working on their version of the budget to reflect what the House of Delegates' priorities are. The Senate of Virginia is currently working on, independently, on their version of the budget to reflect what their priorities are. Obviously, those two budgets never match up perfectly, and that's when a conference committee is convened. A conference committee consists of a smaller group of members of the House and Senate who get together to try to reconcile the differences in those two budgets. Once that reconciliation of the budget has taken place, then the House and Senate vote on the budget, and it is sent to the governor for any amendments or potential vetoes that the governor may want to enact. Then we come back 40 days later in what's called the reconvened or the veto session, and at the veto session we consider any amendments or vetoes that the governor may have made to the budget.
Now
so it's a kind of extended process.
It sounds like it. Those conferees are appointed by the respective leadership in either the Senate or the House?
Yes, sir. The individuals who are on the conference committee are appointed by the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee and the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. Obviously, there comes a point where we can't have 140 legislators trying to reconcile differences in a budget. So we generally reduce that down to anywhere from, say, 9 to 10 legislators to reconcile it through the conference process.
Now, some people suggest that the U.S. Congress should take heed of the way the states operate, excuse me, in terms of the need to or the requirement to balance the budget. Talk to us about those differences between the states and the federal government.
There is a universe difference between the United States Congress and the General Assembly of Virginia. I'll be very tepid in my observations today because I don't want to offend any of my congressional friends who may be watching. We do more in the General Assembly of Virginia in 45 days or 60 days than the United States Congress does in an entire year. We have a much more efficient process. While there is some partisan overlay in what we do in the General Assembly, it is absolutely de minimis compared to what goes on in Washington, D.C. In Virginia, we have a constitutional requirement to balance our budget. What a novel thought. Virginia is not allowed to deficit spend. We can't find ourselves in a shortfall and run down to the Department of Treasury and crank out some bonds or go borrow from some funds to balance our budget. And that's a discipline of fiscal responsibility which the federal government seems not to be able to grasp. If you follow the historical trends on a national level of what we've done with the national debt, under both parties there have been significant deficits that run. I think right now we're at an all-time high, and it's literally going to take generations to pay that back. It is perplexing to me what the major resistance is on a national level to adhere to a balanced budget without deficit spending, why they continue to avoid a meaningful discussion and action on a constitutional amendment that would require a balanced budget. You have to balance your budget at home.
Yes.
I have to balance my budget at home. As the co-chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I feel an enormous responsibility to the citizens of Virginia that we exercise fiscal restraint, fiscal prudence, and ensure that we have a balanced budget. I have been around long enough where I've been through 2 recessions here in the General Assembly where we've had to cut spending, and I've been here when we've had a more robust economy and had unanticipated revenues to spend. So you've got to exercise some fiscal discipline, and that seems to be a characteristic that absolutely escapes those people in Washington, D.C.
Now, continuing along those lines, apparently we have at least a 2-year reprieve in terms of sequestration. And as a result, the Commonwealth, as it has been doing since the recession, is diversifying its economy. Is trying to get away from the largesse of the federal government in terms of depending upon those funds to maintain the economy of Virginia. Talk to us about what the Commonwealth is doing in that regard.
Well, Virginia, as I recall, has the second greatest dependence on Department of Defense dollars of any other state. I believe California is the only one that exceeds us on a per capita basis. The importance of that is that the federal government and the Department of Defense are an enormous economic engine in Virginia. Visually, if you drive through Hampton Roads or Northern Virginia, it is abundantly clear of that dependency that we have on federal dollars. As a result of decisions that have been made in Washington by the Obama administration there, we are looking at sequestration and the reduction of expenditures from the Department of Defense. That has a very significant fiscal impact on Virginia, and we have to have enough foresight and responsibility to react to that. The General Assembly is keenly aware of it. Our governor is keenly aware of it. The governor has been working very hard to encourage the delay of sequestration. But more importantly, the governor, working in a partnership with the legislative branch, continues to be very energetic in trying to attract new business and industry to the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are hopeful that that will generate new jobs and new opportunities to help transition Virginia to a new economy. But we've had a reliance on the Department of Defense dollars for probably hundreds of years, and we're not going to be able to do that transformation to a new Virginia economy overnight. What we must do is create the momentum to start transitioning Virginia's economy so there's less dependency on those federal dollars. And this administration and this General Assembly are working very hard to do that. And I think that we can do it. I continue to marvel at the innovative thinking and the inventions and patents and new approaches that are coming forward. Virginia just needs to be at the forefront of that. In this budget, regardless of how it comes out at the end, it will have significant dollars for economic development. It will have significant dollars for academic research, and that is all part of a momentum to move and transition Virginia's economy.
How important is the transportation funding that passed the General Assembly in 2013 to the effort of economic independence, so to speak? Obviously, you need roads in good repair. You need new roads in order to maintain and attract new businesses to the Commonwealth.
Maintaining Virginia's infrastructure is incredibly important. And when I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about the interstate system, the secondary road system, bridges, but we're also, talking about the accessibility through the ports, which I consider a major infrastructure. Our airports are a vital part of that infrastructure. For too many years, Virginia, I think, put that infrastructure focus on the back burner. Consequently, we've built up a deficit of projects that need to be taken care of. In both Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia, you'll recall a couple of years ago that we created some regional authorities to try to generate tax revenues in those regions to address transportation issues. Unfortunately, at the time that we enacted that legislation, the price of gas was about at $3.25. I heard on the radio this morning that if you really take the prevailing wholesale price of oil, that would translate into about $1.45 for a gallon of gas. If you have a tax index to the per gallon cost, it's pretty easy to figure out, even for an English history major like me, that we are generating less money for transportation in those areas. The ports has a request in for $350 million to increase the infrastructure in the port to handle more cargo and more cargo efficiently. Dulles Airport has a request in for $50 million to try to ensure that they retain a major carrier at that particular facility. Aubrey Lane, the Secretary of Transportation, has been a very fine advocate for paying attention to our roads and highways. So we are focused on it. The challenge with transportation, unlike some other core areas of government, is that you put money in transportation, but you may not see the outcome or the product for years to come. You start talking about building roads, you've got to go through environmental impact statements, which involve both the state and federal government. You have to go through right-of-way acquisition. You have to go through the awarding of contracts, and then the construction itself. So you don't get instant gratification or results on transportation. If you took that same amount of money and put it in kindergarten through 12 education, you could see a result in a much quicker period of time.
As a matter of fact, that $350 million request from the Port of Virginia will not be seen immediately as well, but that is a real result of what's going on in the Panama Canal. As I understand it, these huge Panamax ships will be able to come into the Port of Virginia. They may be there now, and we have a competitive advantage at this point, but we need to maintain that in terms of ports on the eastern seaboard like New York and Charleston.
Well, it's a very competitive market, and you're absolutely right. These new Panamanian Max ships that are coming in with enormous containers is very significant. If you get up in New York, which is a significant port, they're already in the process of trying to raise the height of a bridge so that they can get those Panamanian ships underneath. Down, in Charleston and Savannah, that they're looking at it. The one advantage that we already have here in Virginia, and we don't want to lose that advantage, is we are much closer to the depth that will accommodate those ships. You need about 55 feet, as I recall, in depth on that. And we're pretty close to that. We're maybe at 50 feet. Savannah and Georgia have got much more significant challenges in that regard. But these other states are being more aggressive in their ability to accommodate these Panamanian ships, and we just cannot afford to lose that competitive edge in Virginia. But that competitive edge comes at a very significant cost. The $350 million that's being requested by the port is basically for cranes and infrastructure. It does not include any additional dredging, which even with a federal match could be about another $125 million.
And that port is really important in terms of the biggest revenue producer in the state of Virginia, and that being agriculture, because there are a lot of exports now abroad. So talk to us about agriculture and how important that is to the state of Virginia.
Well, agriculture remains very important in the Commonwealth of Virginia. If you listen to the governor on some of the announcements that he has made about the trade missions that he's taken, he's talked about poultry. I remember him joking about chicken feet. Under Governor McDonnell, there was an awful lot of discussion about the exportation of soybeans. Virginia remains a major producer of agriculture. In fact, I had the privilege of representing the Eastern Shore of Virginia for a decade. The Eastern Shore of Virginia frequently was referred to as the breadbasket of Virginia. They rely very heavily upon an agriculture and an aquaculture industry over there. So we are still producing lots of agricultural and aquaculture products in Virginia that are being exported. There seems to be a pent-up demand for a lot of these exports, but we've got to get them to market.
Now, the foundation of all of this, of course, is a workforce, a ready workforce for employers, private employers primarily, who we need to retain here and who we want to attract here. That starts at the K through 12 level. We have our community colleges and our institutions for higher learning. Talk to us about our educational system and how it is doing.
Overall, I think our educational system is doing well. I think that we continue to have the opportunity to move towards excellence. From a higher education perspective, I think that Virginia has the most outstanding and best public system of higher education in the country. We provide a diversity of opportunities from a 2-year community college experience to obviously a 4-year and greater experience in our 4-year institutions. I happen to believe that we need to put more resources in kindergarten through 12. We have got to stimulate these young people at the earliest age to understand the importance of an education. I will admit I have a bias. My oldest daughter is a kindergarten teacher. She's a very good advocate for education investment. But the sooner that we can catch these children and stimulate them and give them the opportunity to learn regardless of their socioeconomic background, the better off Virginia is going to be. Not just from a preparation ultimately of a workforce, but we create that ability through education for an individual to enjoy financial independence rather than financial dependence on government. So from a purely economic standpoint, there is a major cost avoidance by creating that financial independence and the ability of individuals through education, certification, say in the community colleges, are getting a functional degree out of the four-year institutions is a huge economic engine in the Commonwealth of Virginia that we cannot lose focus on.
And of course, I think we have about 800,000 veterans who are resident in the Commonwealth. There are opportunities from them. Virginia values veterans. Talk about that program. You mentioned certifications at our community colleges. For instance, a member of our armed forces returning from a theater of war who may happen to have been a medic can now get credit towards a certification, I believe, in that field of endeavor. So talk to us about the importance of our veterans and what they contribute to us.
We owe our veterans an enormous amount of respect and appreciation for the service that they are giving us. Veterans are facing an entirely new enemy, if you will, out there, and the enemy, of course, is terrorism, which does not always have defined boundaries and do not play by conventional rules. And we're seeing many of the veterans come back. Virginia is a home to, as you said, hundreds of thousands of veterans. Virginia is making adjustments to make sure that we're not only appreciative but more accommodating to our veterans who want to come here after they're out of the service or when they retire. You may recall last year we moved forward on the initiative to create 2 new health centers, one in Hampton Roads and one in Northern Virginia. We're also looking at giving the veterans credit for experiences that they had on active duty. Some of our major corporations like Dominion Virginia Power have landmark programs to hire vets who have those experiences.
Thank you for being with us, Senator Tommy Norment, the Majority Leader in the Virginia State Senate. Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.